Greetings everyone. I am Omkaar Pattanayak, the founder and president of the Global Federal League. Today, I am honored to have with me Mr. Tomás Molina. Tomás is one of the advisors of Democracy Without Borders and is currently the president of its Spanish chapter. With experience in different organizations within the movement, he started with Democracia Global in Argentina, and while collaborating there, he was named the UNPA campaign coordinator for Latin America. In 2019, he moved to Spain, and while launching the local section for Democracy Without Borders, he also joined JEF Spain, that is the Young European Federalists. Tomás has a degree in international relations from the University of Belgrano in Argentina and is currently doing a master's degree in public affairs and lobby from Universidad Nebrija. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly.
It's correct. It's correct. Very good.
Thank you. And the IMF Business School. So it's a great honor to have you with us today, Tomás.
Thank you, Omkaar. It's a real pleasure for me to be here with you.
And I personally am very interested. I'm very excited. I was very excited for this interview because I look forward to pursuing international relations during my postgraduate studies after law, and again public policy, public affairs. That sounds really exciting. So I look forward to this. I was looking forward to this interview.
I think that well, firstly, thank you for that, and secondly, if this is something that international relations is a really beautiful degree to study. So if that's the way you're looking forward to it, I'm really happy to have a fellow colleague in that area of study for sure.
Indeed. So Tomás, firstly, why did you become a world federalist? Where did you first learn about the idea, and how have your opinions changed since then?
So it was all at first. It was an issue of chance, Why do I say this? We had this program in the university where you sort of had to work, do some internships in different places, and in order to get your final degree, So when I was doing that, they were offering different type of internships in my university. Some of them were working in parliament with different PMs. Others, working on think tanks and things like that, but none of them really caught my eye. I was always very interested in NGOs, and so this opportunity arose, and I figured I learned a little bit about Democracia Global, which is the organization where I started, and it sounded really interesting. So I decided to start doing my internship, voluntary work there, and from there, working with their campaigns. I was first introduced to COPLA, which is a campaign that they have that looks for the creation of a criminal court against organized crime, which is one of the main problems in Latin America. So slowly but surely, the more I started working with them, the more I started knowing about what federalism meant, because honestly, in the university, even it wasn't really a term that was discussed or a political movement that was discussed. When I started knowing about what federalism meant, lots of things of what I already thought, without knowing what that meant, became clear to me. That happened quite a bit because I had these ideas. And I think that most of us who are faced with federalism and are interested in this, I just didn't know what was their name, So I started sort of giving them a system and putting it in place in terms of a larger movement, a larger, let's say, ideology, and reading about Kant, reading about their origins, and from there the process grew slowly, but it grew quite a bit. And I would say that I first started calling myself really a federalist when I had the opportunity in 2016 to take part in the Ventotene seminars that they hold in Italy, in the island where Altiero Spinelli, one of the founders of the European Union, was imprisoned. And there, having that sort of in-depth look towards the movement, not only from my perspective in Argentina, but also from my perspective in Europe, and knowing that there were more like-minded people like me, that's when it really kicked in. And from that point on, I became 100% involved in the movement. And just to, in terms of how it changed, how it changed from the start, from now, I think that the key difference of my activism there, it's, once you start gathering experience, you at least, and this is, how I approach whatever I do, I start getting into very in depth towards what's the ideology, what the movement, what the principles mean. But after I go through that phase, I start thinking about, okay, how can we put this in practice? What I can do, because I tend to be more of a person of reflection and then action, but I need the action, right? So for me now, federalism means more of the actions that we do and the things that we do and how we try to promote it, rather than just the reflection of what the movement means. And that is something that changed probably in the middle from where I started till where I'm now.
So would it be correct to say that your conception of federalism and world federalism as a whole, that's still evolving and that will keep on undergoing change? It's not yet cast in stone.
I think that is correct. And I think that that's also one of the definitions of why I like this movement. I think that it's a movement that it's flexible, that it's, even if it's ideological, it's very open to diversity within the movement. I know lots of people within it that do not think the same, do not think that the same paths lead to the same goals, or even that have left or right differences in terms of ideology. So I think that movement, that evolution is very important. I think that as long as we have the core values in place, which I think that we do, I think that all federalists have those core values, the sort of anti-nationalism and anti-populism, a question of the rule of law, international rule of law. As long as we keep those values, it's a movement that can transition and make itself useful towards the need of the time. Our federalist movement today, and the core ideas of it should be, and I think are, very different than when our founders started the movement in the 50s. The world is very different, so ideas should be different.
Indeed. I have a follow-up question on the anti-nationalism part. Do you essentially consider anti-nationalism as anti-patriotism?
No, I think that those are two different things. I think that that's a very good question and a very good discussion to have. I cannot claim that I have the answers on it. I think that there's a lot of discussion that needs to be had by many different people. I understand people that try to make a quite clear difference between patriotism and nationalism. I think that I'm more on the side of, that I don't think that patriotism is a concept that really speaks to me, but I understand people that are that hold that as very important and as very a key part of developing even identities within federalism. And I see that a lot, for example, in the European movement, where there's a question constantly of patriotism, even to save the EU, in a sense of that making that difference between the nationalist movements here and patriotism, like for example Macron would speak of. I don't feel compelled to have that discussion of something of principle, because I honestly, from my origins, let's say within the movement and within what I see, I always think of humanity as one, and for me the idea of states doesn't really call to me at all. So the idea of patriotism doesn't really call to me either, or national identity. I like customs, I like traditions, and I think that the world needs them, and I am very open to cultural identities, but the idea of of patriotism or state patriotism doesn't call to me.
That's quite the same over here. I'm proud of my culture, I'm proud of the diversity of my country, but then I'm not really very possessive in that state that, okay, I'm not getting the exact word. I'm more of a cosmopolitan, and not in the ethnocentric sense. I really feel patriotic. So I believe that's something which both of us share.
Yeah, I think so. And that's important. That sense of culture needs to stay. And there's not a question in federalism, I think, that doesn't really talk to that issue, and I think that it shouldn't talk to that issue. That the difference in terms of valuing one's culture is very different. I value my culture, I value where I come from, I value my origins, but do I feel patriotism, for example, for the concept of Argentina, or Does that concept make me less involved into my idea of a citizen for the world or a citizen in Spain, for example, where I'm at? Not at all. My idea of politics is the same, exact same living in Spain as living in Argentina. I hold my citizen duties. I vote here. I do everything, and I have, quite a lot of love for the country I am at as the one I left. So again, that patriotism, I cannot really feel it, because it would mean for me that I have patriotism for both for Spain and Argentina. Yeah, it could be. But I don't know.
So you have worked with Democracia Global in Argentina. Could you tell us something about your experience working over there? And also a bit about how was the reception of the idea of world federalism over there? What do Argentinians think about world federalism?
Yeah. So in terms of the work with Democracia Global, it was really, really important to me. First, because I think that now I'm speaking to something not within the movement, but mostly within work relations and work environments. It was an organization where I had the opportunity to meet wonderful people that are still my friends. Even one of them actually moved to Spain a couple of weeks ago, and I was really happy to see him back here. So that is something that it's very valued. And in terms of the perspective that they gave me, well, firstly, it's something very important, which is, and I think that the contracts between the global south and the north, I could get it in that sense, is what it's like to work in an NGO in the global south, and one that has a lot of deficiencies in terms of money and resources. And that gave me a lot of flexibility to understand that in a lot of times you don't need resources to do really important stuff, that there are ways to work around the lack of resources and the lack of funding. You just need to be more creative and work on bigger coalitions, not maybe within people, because again, Democracia Global was a very small organization. We weren't lots of people working in it, but we had big coalitions. Our founder was an MP. And we took that opportunity to work with an MP to open up our coalition in terms of parliament, relations with universities, relations with even with, let's say, philosophers and people that would give us content. So again, it gave me that pragmatism that is needed to work when there's lack of resources, which I think that sometimes is very good. And even led me to think that sometimes even lack of resources for certain projects are really beneficial, because at first on the first parts of the process, because it gives you the opportunity to really look of the more efficient way to work around issues and to involve the most people and organizations and things as possible. So that gave me Democracia Global in general. And if you don't mind repeating the second part of the question for me.
Yeah, sure. So how did Argentinians receive the idea of world federalism?
Yeah, look, it's not really in the concept. It's not really something very conceptual in Argentina. And I think that happens in most of the world, right? The idea that federalism, what does it mean? It's very difficult, and it changes, and there's different perspectives. In Argentina, there's two things sort of that go hand in hand when you discuss the idea of federalism and the word federalism by itself. Firstly, because Argentina is by definition a federal country. So they have different provinces, different institutions. So whenever you talk about the idea of federalism, they understand it within the concept of their own country. Like it would happen, for example, in the US or probably in India, right? The idea of what it means locally. And then in terms of the generic more idea of a citizen of the world, let's say, I think Argentinians of some political spectrum are very open to it, and of the other political spectrum are not. And what do I mean by this? I'm not going to go too much in depth because it's a little bit complex to explain, but in Argentina, there's one political movement that defined the whole history of the country, which is called Peronism, that it's by definition a very nationalistic ideological movement. From left and right, you have people from both sides, but it's very the idea of a nation, of the idea of Argentina, not in terms of culture or race, but the idea of the working class, Argentinian working class. It's very ingrained in their ideologies. So it's very difficult to discuss about international citizenship because it's looked upon as even as something outsider, and which doesn't define what Argentina means. But let's say the opposition to that, the opposition parties to what federalism brings to the table, they are very open to it because they have this idea of the cosmopolitan Argentina, the Argentina that it's very much linked, for example, to Europe, very much linked to the culture there, that it's always looking outside. And Argentina is a country that has migrants all over the world, even being a very small country. So, and they are more open of understanding the world through the lens of something more international, but also bringing it into local politics, because it seems like there's an antithesis between the Peronism and the anti-Peronism, let's call it, that defines the country.
So, to a large extent, like there are many facets of the thing. It's not that people are dead in support of world federalism or dead against it, but again, depends on what exactly do we pitch in as a plank. So that's Argentina. And what about the other countries in Latin America? Like, do they have similar sentiments or there are slight variations?
In Latin America, there are countries that have different issues, but stemming from a very similar perspective, because again, the idea of cosmopolitanism in the Americas has always been very much linked to the idea of colonialism, and the idea not on the same colonialism that, for example, Asia or Africa had, because we had our independence movements earlier, but the idea that there's a very like autochthonous, national class of people that are mostly linked to, let's say, Indians and descendants from the Latin America, so Native Americans, and the idea that there's a European class that came pretty much later, and they were the ones who sort of gained the means of production, right? So it's very much linked to social class in a sense. So that repeats itself in lots of countries where the sort of the urban people tend to be more cosmopolitan, and the people in the interior much less. It also has to do a little bit with distances. Latin America is very far from the rest of the world. To travel anywhere from Latin America takes lots and lots and lots of hours by airplane. So in general, and even people that live in the interior of the countries, it's even tougher, because even to travel to, let's say, you're a Brazilian and you're living in a very small state in the Amazon, to reach your capital, and then from your capital to travel around the world is very tough. So that makes it a sense of a lot of exclusion. So in a sense, it's a little bit tough in Latin America to discuss, because again, let's say there are basic needs that need to be addressed first. We have seen openness in governments to discuss further integration, and there are ideas in governments that have this, especially in terms of solidarity between nations. I think that's a concept in Latin America that's very present. The idea of political movements being united in the whole continent, that is very present, and then there are concepts that stem from the relation, of course, with the US that are very much discussed, like the idea of Pan-Americanism, the idea of a greater Latin America. So there are things that you can sort of get hold on to discuss, to put the frame, let's say, the debate around federalism. But I think that the debate there needs to be more pragmatic. And for example, what the guys in Democracia Global did with the COPLA campaign, I think that calls to it, because we are addressing there a key issue, a key problem. And from that problem, we put a federalist solution. But we don't talk about federalism. We talk about the problem, and we talk about the solution. And we frame it in terms of, this is what we need. And I think that that's the way to move forward in a continent such as Latin America.
That's very interesting. As being someone personally who doesn't know much about the continent, and I don't really have a lot of idea on this, so it's interesting to know how the movement is evolving in different continents. I personally had a prejudice that like most of the Latin American countries, they have similar problems, and they're similar in the sense. So it's to some extent they're homogeneous, but from what I've learned from you, I believe there's a great degree of diversity among Latin American countries also, and like there are a lot of innovative ways to reach out to people. So that's a great job. Are you still associated with Democracia Global?
I'm still on the board of Democracia Global. Yes, I am still part of the board. I'm not 100% active because with the other responsibilities it's a little bit tough. But I do cooperate with them and have conversations with them. Things that I can give a hand once in a while.
That's great to know. So my next question that's also associated with this. You have to a large extent answered this. What differences do you see in Spain as the president of Democracy Without Borders chapter? And like, what is the difference between the mode of working of Democracia Global and Democracy Without Borders?
Well, I think that the key difference here is that we are in very different stages. I mean, Democracia Global is an organization that has 10 plus years. I think that even 15, while we are just starting here. We're just starting. We also have another issue that it's important for our definition as an organization in Spain, which is our relation to the key European organizations like UEF Spain and JEF Spain, right? The Young World Federalists, the Young European Federalist in Spain and the European Federalist in Spain. So that is something that you don't have in Democracia Global. Basically, you are the only organization that represents federalism in the country and one of the very few that represents federalism in Latin America. So that already changes the concept of how you cooperate. For us, the two issues here go hand in hand. One is the construction and the framework of getting volunteers and start developing projects. That's one of the main points that we are working on. And the second is how do we position ourselves next to another organization such as UEF and JEF. So that is another thing that really takes work. What we do basically is we try to incorporate people from these organizations, also influence these organizations to pay much more attention to world federalism, which is not a minor thing because really in Europe, and this happens in all the continent, the European Federalists and the Young European Federalists increasingly have people within them that are more like European Union supporters than federalism supporters. So we need to be very vigilant and try to do our best first to identify people within those movements that would want to cooperate with us and talk about world federalism and work on world federalist issues, and also to make ourselves present and relevant in their conversations so that they do not stream too far away from what we're trying to achieve. So I would say that the work it's quite different. We have a lack of resources as well, but the focus is very different.
So yeah, coming to Latin America again, we didn't have a Democracy Without Borders chapter over there or other organizations.
I think that this is something that came up quite a bit. Honestly, I have an opinion with regards to. I don't know if it's a very popular opinion, but it's an opinion nonetheless. I honestly think that the key strategy would be to have further collaboration between organizations and not just open organizations for the sake of opening organizations. Unless there is a real need to do so, I always think that it's better to cooperate with what we have there. And I would say the same thing for Spain, for example. There was a need in Spain. There was a need for a World Federalist Perspective organization. That's what we opened it here for. We've been working on this since 2020. We've been working on this. So we had to sort of fill in a vacuum. I do not think that, at least in the short term, in countries like Argentina, and I would say, for example, in the US and in different places, like there are organizations that are filling in that vacuum. So I'm more the proponent of let's further cooperate, or even let's add resources to them with different perspectives maybe, and then we can work out the definition. But considering that we are a movement that is currently, we have to be honest with ourselves. We are not the movement from the 1950s. This is a movement in 2022 now. 21 passed very quickly, but it passed, and we don't have the amount of people to really like have a one organization for two people, right? There's a very funny joke in Argentina around with regards to the communist left, that we say that there are as many communist parties in Argentina because you have like Trotsky party, Lenin party, Stalin party, Mao party, as many people that believe in communism there. So I'm always more of a proponent of like a big tent approach. Let's get as much people in it in one organization, and then we can fight it out inside of whose perspective is better. But let's not break everything up. Let's not do 10 organizations for the same issue. And that's something that I always, and I know it's not very popular in our movement, but I really believe in. The difference are so small sometimes, so small that it doesn't make sense to me to have as many organizations. But we'll see what it happens. I try in Spain to do that. I try to incorporate as many people as possible, and open up to the more discussion if possible. I would rather have less organizations as possible and be more diverse. That's my goal.
I absolutely agree with your opinion of not having as like a lot of organizations just for the sake of having them. But again, doesn't the World Federalist Movement Institute for Global Policy serve that purpose? Like it's a consortium of leading World Federalist organizations, and we have Democracy Without Borders over there. I believe Young World Federalist is a member. Citizens for Global Solutions. I don't know about Democracia Global. So like, doesn't that already serve the purpose?
I think that these organizations serve that purpose. I think that I can't really explain it. I very quickly, why do we have this approach? I think that it's just an approach of, I think that it's also an approach related to changes, because many of these organizations are very old, and let's say, and maybe the leadership couldn't find a way to renew itself. So what it ended up happening is like a plethora of organizations because they weren't covering the needs. But honestly, again, I have a position taken, but I don't have really like a solution to it. I understand why these organizations have a plethora, and in countries you have one or three or two or three organizations. I understand it. I don't really share it. And I think also that one of the key issues is that hopefully, instead of growing more organizations in countries where we have organizations already, the key issue should be to expand to countries that we do not have organizations. It's tougher. It's much tougher. But if we put our resources and efforts to that, I think that would be key.
You talked about the Young European Federalists also. So how are they different from Democracy Without Borders and Democracia Global? And a follow-up question to that, do all these organizations have a similar organizational structure with chapters and branches?
So, the Young European Federalist and the European Federalist, WEF and JEF, they are standouts within our movement. Why? Mainly three reasons, I would say. Number one is that their political objectives are much more developed than ours. There's no question about it. The European Union is the best federalist project that we have at hand by far. Secondly, the resources. Even their resources are not big, but they are much bigger than ours. So that really creates a lot of differences when it comes to running an organization. And thirdly, they managed to tap much better than us, and this is something that we are lacking a lot in terms of activist support. They are much more mobilized than us, much more, by far. The things that they do, they really have a big impact, with their difficulties, of course, but they are on a better path than us. And I think that we can learn a lot from the European movements. Is everything transportable? Let's say, can we copy and paste that organization to our regions and countries? I don't think so. But I think that there's a lot more than we can learn from them that what they can learn from us. What we can provide, and that's where the difference are issues of pragmatism, sometimes a little bit, maybe more of political daring, because I feel that sometimes JEF and WEF feel more like supporters of, without being too critical, and not in terms of the people who are leading these organizations, but a lot of the people who are like base activists that are more like into like cheerleading the European Union, when there's a lot of things to do here to improve. And I think that organizations like Democracia Global, Democracy Without Borders, seem to be a little bit more critical to the status quo in some sense. But yeah, they are very different. And in terms of structures, there are similarities, especially with Democracy Without Borders. I think they are, because here JEF and WEF first has the same model as JEF, but which is basically like the European Secretariat and the European Organization. Then you divide it through countries that have like a federal model, and then through those same countries you have another federal model with local chapters. That would be one, for example, if you go, let's say, from the lower ones to the higher ones, you go JEF Madrid. From JEF Madrid, you go to JEF Spain, and from JEF Spain, you go to JEF Europe. And in terms of money, basically, in terms of the people, who pay memberships, that money you start, it's almost like a tax system in terms of a little bit of that money stays, a little bit goes to the next level, a little bit of that stays, a little bit goes to the next level. So that's a very federal way to do it. And I think that they have pretty much good success with that. And I think Democracy Without Borders has it. Democracia Global, it's a little bit of a different issue, because even though that Argentina is a federal country, it's very much centralized in the capital city. So that model wouldn't be something to replicate. But maybe if something would happen in Latin America, it could take some kind of similar model to that.
Mhm. That was very insightful. So you have, what I can gauge, and there's no doubt in it, you have been very deeply involved into activism and organizing civil societies. So what did you personally and professionally gain from your involvement in this field?
For me, the thing that I gained professionally, and this is why I'm also now doing my master's in public affairs and lobby, is that I had the opportunity to really get into and understand what lobbying means, and what dealing with moving and providing insights to MPs and to people, generating political structures and institutions does. And that was something that I got it because of my time there, because I had to do that work when I was coordinating the UNPA campaign, getting in contact with MP across Latin America. So these opportunities gave me a lot of professional insight into something, and gave me the opportunity to do something that now I'm trying to convert it 100% into my profession, right? So there was a lot of growth process in that. And of course, again, also the diversity, and that's very important, of tasks and things to do, right? Again, coordinating an organization, there's a lot of things to do. And a lot of diversity in it, and you can learn from different stuff, from developing an event, and or working a strategy document, whatever. So there was a lot of growth, and I'm really happy of how these organizations gave me the opportunity to grow professionally, and that I can, I took it to other areas of what I do when I was working in political parties and whatever I'm doing. I managed to take a little bit of that and take it, and hopefully become also better and more of an added bonus to whatever organization, wants me having them, collaborating with them.
What suggestions would you give to the passionate people out there like me, who wish to get involved in this field further?
The first suggestion is that, which is something that I always say, and I mentioned it last year. I had the opportunity to go back to Entatena. And to my colleagues, I told them, because especially this is something that applies to all activism, but it really applies to us, which is the fact that you need to be aware that what you are sort of striving for might not happen. These are not givens. Just because there's a bunch of people like us, I don't know, climate activists, that they want to make the world more sustainable, honestly, and it's tending to look like it might not happen. But the question here is not if what we're striving for happens or not, but that is that we are passionate enough to fail, but fail doing and defending the ideas that we want to do. And I think that there's something quite romantic about it, right? It feels like, I don't know, I probably heard about Quixote and the story, which is something very Spanish, the idea of fighting against, I can't remember the name in English, but Molinos de Viento, sorry, I can't remember. But the idea of fighting about something that you can't really probably beat. But that shouldn't be your frustration. That should be your power, that you're doing something for the good. And that thing for me is the key, the motivation, because anything can be learned, anything. I mean, it's just a question of experience and of putting yourself out there and doing, failing, learning. So that will be my advice. Be passionate and don't be afraid to do and to imagine and to try out whatever you want to try out, and don't get discouraged by failure, because that's the possibility that's always going to happen. If you're discouraged by failure and you say, okay, yes, but I cannot change this, but I cannot change that, then you're going to quit very quickly and you're going to forget of the reasons why you're there. You're not there to succeed. We want to succeed, but that's not the point. The point is that we're convinced of what we're doing, and even if it's something very small, you want to end up your day saying, okay, I try to do my best to make the world something more, something better for all of us.
Yeah, that was very inspiring, and I believe this suggestion of yours that will motivate me and a lot of other people watching this video out over there. So that was really inspiring. We'll now come back to the serious questions.
Yeah.
So, you're a student of business, I believe, business and public affairs. So how do you envision business and commerce in a world federation? And do you think institutions like the International Monetary Fund and the World Trade Organization, can they be reformed within contemporary diplomatic framework?
Yeah, so that's a great question. In terms of the first part, I always been a big advocate for the idea of commerce. I'm very much into history, world history, and I think that international commerce has always been a force for good, in the terms of it binds people together. It's a very good way to guarantee peace, because peace and prosperity usually come with commerce and interactions, and you can see through history that periods of where commercial activities in the world drop usually are periods that lead to war in general. And so I'm a very much proponent to that. So I always believe that the idea of commerce, the idea of interactions, both for services and for just exchange, is something that should be at the core of what we believe in, right? I can understand that it goes a little bit maybe against what we're discussing of more sustainable and local consumption, which I understand too. I just believe that we cannot really go into a world environment, let's say, a federation of the world, and not have commerce and the idea of international exchanges present. Maybe it shouldn't be goods. Maybe we shouldn't be sailing boats across the world to get materials, but there are other ways for commerce. Commerce today could be digital, but we need those interactions that commerce generates. We need them. I think that we will lose a lot if we do not have a world where that is the norm, where we are exchanging things, being goods, services, with the rest of the world. So that's part, and maybe that's my sort of liberal part of it. And in terms of the institutions, well, I think that I'm not saying anything pretty much revolutionary, saying that the World Bank, IMF, they need to change. I mean, they were institutions constructed for a world that doesn't exist anymore, right? Post Bretton Woods, the world was a whole different thing. The world changed. This institution haven't. So there's two keys for me here. The first one is just to sit down and rebuild the institutional model, not destroy it, rebuild it towards something that it's more related to the reality that we live in. And here we're going to need, for sure, the input of multilateral systems, right? This cannot be done, even I believe it cannot be done through a 100% democratic way. I think that there should be a multilateral discussion on this that of course, has to lead, and this is a federal principle, it has to lead through the democratization of them. These institutions need to have democratic vigilance. So I think that it's a step one of redesigning them and a step two of making them democratic through, for the, constructed democratic institutions that could be models like UNPA, any type of model that we can propose. I think that this is where we are maybe lacking some sort of there needs to be debate on how to do it, how to make these processes, but this process is, I think, what needs to happen.
Mm-hmm. So with that, I'll move on to the next question on what's your opinion on World Federalist organizations entering politics and contesting elections? And do you support political parties like Volt Europa?
Mm-hmm. I think that because of the nature of federalism, because I believe that it should be a tent movement in a sense that we should all fit in, despite our left-right political ideologies, as long as we believe in core principles, that within those core principles, you can be more of a free trade proponent, you can be more of even a conservative, things that, because you're a conservative in terms of, I don't know, family values or other questions, doesn't mean that you cannot believe in the principles of rule of law, world law, and those. So I believe that our action shouldn't be through creating political platforms on the idea of federalism. My proposition is that we need to have people within the political structures that we have that will live in our principles and take our principles as a flag and as a key element within their political organizations. That is why, for example, I'm bringing it to the case of Volt. I do like Volt. I mean, I think that it's something necessary, and I think that it's good that it's there. But I sometimes struggle with how they, what's the message that they take, right? Because it's not clear to the citizen, and a normal citizen, at least the way I see it, to understand what do they mean, right? Because they are saying that, of course, that they are the most pro-European political party, and that is right. But within parties, like, I don't know, I worked with Ciudadanos in Spain, which is the centrist liberal party. I was working with the Coordination for International Expansion. You have people within it that are also very European, and even the president of our party at one point, the last president, not the one we have right now, said that he believed in United States of Europe. So, at least I think that my question is, you're going to need to better define what Volt is in order to make it something relevant for citizens. And I feel that the task should be more to construct leadership within our movements that then will go out into different political parties and bring their message. That for me is much more exciting. I feel that there's a lot to do in that, mainly because we had a lot of, in Europe, for example, there's been a lot of leadership, of high leadership, political leadership that are supporters of WEF, for example. But I feel that sometimes when they are in those positions of power, they tone down their discourse, and I think that shouldn't happen. I understand why they do it, but that shouldn't happen. So I think that that's an issue that we need to solve. We need our leadership to be more ambitious and be more open about what they discuss in the public media when they are in politics. But I'm also very much excited when I see that people within our movements, they go into politics, because I know that they're going to take their ideas with them and maybe talk with somebody else in their party, convince them, and then those topics will become key topics of political platforms. The more people believe in them in political parties, the more likely that these are going to be discussed in assemblies, in whatever structure that they have. For example, in Ventotene, there were a couple of Italian friends of mine there that I met during the seminar, that very young, and they were all going to present themselves for local elections for their city councils. And I was excited, really excited about that. And I said, like, guys, that is great. You should continue this. This is the way to go. And I would hope for everyone in our movements to do the same, to start getting into political action and getting elected, building up a career there, and bringing their ideas with them as something key. so that they do not forget where they are coming from.
Mhm. So yeah, but again, I have a follow-up question to this. We have had historically leaders like Jawaharlal Nehru, people like Winston Churchill and Roosevelt and others out over there who supported the idea of world federalism, the idea of federalism in their writings and in public as well. So like they were there, but then again, they were more focused on the personal political ideas. So again, don't you think we need some political entity to pursue the idea of world federalism as a whole, maybe on an international level?
I think we do. I don't think it's like the solution to the key problems. I think that the key problems here, and the ones that, for example, this type of leaders were facing, is that there's no mass political support for these ideas. So I think that the battle won't be won because once, you know, the sort of, not, let me rephrase it, the forming of a political, let's say, union, an active that would participate in elections, being worldwide, being at European level, Asian level, and Latin American level, is not going to be the sort of the key piece element to turn this cycle around. I think that the key piece element should come from constructing political opinion. And I think that to construct political opinion and media opinion, I think that we need to first penetrate the institutions that are already set. And from there, building up the idea in normal citizens' life, you know, everyday working families, and you know, your normal citizen that would go and vote in elections, that they will be interesting to start to hear parties, what is their position on these issues. So we could build that party, but that party won't have a real political support, because right now we do not have a mass support in the local media or in the local discussions. People are not worried about those issues. But for example, if tomorrow we have Macron, I'm just putting an ex-leader, saying that he supports a world federation, that will get to the public media. And then we have, and that will bring a discussion. He might not get support. I don't believe he's going to get support. If he says that, he'll probably, a lot of people are going to be against that. That's the problem right now. But the more we put it in public discussions, the more it's going to get to that point. For example, one of the problems that the European Union is having, that in some countries, not in all, is that it's true that you have a lot of support in most countries for the European Union. But the problem is that even if you're having support, the deepening of the European Union is not being discussed on everyday political discussions in countries. So I think that that's the problem. And how do we solve that? We solve that by leaders being more, adventurous, let's say, having a little bit more courage to bring it back again into the scene of discussion. For example, when they have a debate on TV, bringing up this issue as something that is key for their political platform. And that won't happen if Bolt does it, because Bolt needs first to achieve that leadership. And I don't think that with the current platforms they have, that they are going to achieve that leadership. But it's more probable than, for example, because we're talking European politics, that somebody in the popular parties of Europe or the social democrats here can bring that topic to the center stage of the discussion. So I think that what you're proposing is good, but I think it's a little bit ways down the line. And I think that we need to work on a base of political discussion to then go to that next step.